In this video, we're going to go over the basics of shading a face. I'm using a drawing that I made earlier in a previous video for proportions of the face, and that's the one that I'm going to shade here. I find that a lot of my beginning students have a hard time shading skin to start with. They feel like when they first start shading that it doesn't look right, that it looks like, depending on wherever they start, either they think the face looks dirty or it looks like they have a black eye. It never really looks good until you've gotten most of the face done, and that's when you can kind of see how it's working, like, oh, okay, this is working. So I'm going to be here while you struggle, and we'll work our way through it, and I'll show you kind of some basic step-by-step ways to shade a face until you feel more comfortable enough to do it your own way and kind of move on from there. So we're going to start with, I have several different shading pencils. I have a B pencil, an HB would be fine too. I have a 2B, a 4B, and a 6B. The 6B is the darkest pencil that I have right now. I have a blending stump. I have a mechanical eraser. I don't know if I'm going to use it, but I have it in case I want to. And then I've got a larger eraser. Because this is the drawing that I did for proportions of the face, I still have some structure lines on here. So I'm going to start by erasing those. And they still may show up. I'm making this video for the students in my class though, and I don't want them to have to do a whole nother face just for practicing shading the skin. We're gonna move on and create a more finished drawing later. Since this is mostly just for practice, it's okay with me if some of the lines show up on the skin later, some of those structure lines. So in this drawing, we are going to imagine that the light source is coming this direction. Whenever you are shading, if you are inventing light and shadow like I'm doing now, you at least have to start with imagining where it's coming from. And then you have to think about, what does the shape do? So the shape of the face, the forehead is round, it curves this way, which means this side's going to be getting more light than that side. So this side's going to gradually become darker. You have to think about things like the nose. This might create a little bit of a cast shadow because the nose comes out from the face. So that's going to prevent some of this area from getting light. So a lot of this is really some strategic, critical thinking where you're imagining what light is going to do when it hits this form and moves around it. I'm going to start with a blending stump. A lot of times I like to start with an eye and work my way out. That's just my preference. I'm gonna erase some of these lines around this eye too. I'm gonna start with the blending stump because I already have some graphite on it, so I can use it for some of my lighter values. If you don't have graphite on your blending stump already, or you need more, I keep a scrap piece of paper nearby so I can color the paper with a pencil. I can color it with the blending stump. And now I've got graphite on my blending stump that I can use. So I'm going to start by just shading a little bit around the eye. If the light is coming from here, the brow bone is sticking out further. So the area underneath the brow bone is going to get less light. So I'm going to go ahead and shade that just to give it some depth. And then the eye comes out a little bit, so you're going to have a little bit of shading underneath the eye. So this is where most of my students are kind of like, she looks like she has a black eye. That's because everything around that area is white, and this compared to that makes it look like she has a black eye. Just trust the process. We're going to move out from there, and then this will actually be a little bit lighter than some of this over here. Now, if the light is coming from this way, remember this, the eyeball is a sphere. So that means this area, if this was a sphere, this area is getting the most light, and as the eyeball curves around, this area, even though it's the white of the eye, it's not going to be highlighted. So I'm going to shade that. Now I'm going to go into the iris of the eye. I'm using a 2B pencil right now. I could probably use something darker if I wanted to. I'm going to keep a little bit of a light spot right here in the pupil and maybe right above it, as if there's a little bit of a gleam, a shine to the eye. Also, if you look at people's eyes, there tends to be like a darker spot around the iris all the way around. So I'm pressing a little bit harder there. I'm going to redefine this area in the corner of her eye. And I'm going to go back into the eyelashes, but I want to wait until I'm done with the area around her eye first. So I'm going to go in with maybe a 4B pencil and get some of this area in this fold of the eyelid above her eye right here. You don't have to smooth everything out. You can if you want to. That's just a personal preference. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And now I'm going to add those eyelashes back in. So if you want it to look a little more feminine, you could go a little heavier on the eyelashes. In fact, I'm going to get a 6B, my darkest pencil, and I'm going to add those in. And I'm going to go in with a 6B in the pupil in the area that I didn't want the highlight to be. Okay, at this point, I think I'm going to move into the other eye, and then I'll start moving into the skin around it. I'm going to go back to the blending stump, and I'm going to start again in the area right above the eye. And I'm also going to gradually kind of go down the edge of the nose, because this is where I think the nose would cast a shadow. And this is actually going to be a lot darker later, but I'm just going to lay it out right now. I'm going into the whites of her eye on that side. I'm just going to kind of go over most of her whole eye a little bit and then bring out the iris some. We go in and make the iris a little darker, make the pupil a little darker. And I'm going to go back in and do that eye fold over here too. I'm going to add a little bit of extra shading on this side because this half of her face is going to be a lot darker than the other half. And we're going to make it pretty dramatic, I think. Now she definitely looks like she has a black eye. It's going to be fine at the end though, I promise. And then go ahead and add those eyelashes in. Okay, I may go back into this area. I'm going to do the forehead now though. So for the forehead, I'm going to start with the 6B pencil and I'm going to use the side of it over here in the area where I know it's going to be shaded the darkest. And then I'm going to gradually press lighter and lighter as I move towards the middle. And then I'm going to bring the shading stump back into that. So I'm going right over the eyebrow. I'm going to do the eyebrow afterward because you'll still, if I did the eyebrow first, there would be little white spaces between each little eyebrow hair where the skin was showing through. So I want the skin to be the value that it should be first, and then I'll put the texture of the eyebrow on top. You can use the blending stump with little or more pressure. So like the more pressure, the darker it's going to be, just like you do kind of with the pencil. And then over here, I'm barely touching it because I'm gradually having it fade into almost white. I think at this point I'm ready for the eyebrow, on this side at least. So I'm going to go back in and put the eyebrow in. I smoothed it out, but I'm going back over it just in little areas, making like little marks for hair. Now that the eyebrow's done, I'm gonna start shading in this area over here. I'm gonna do the whole thing with the blending stump first, because even the lightest areas on this side of the cheek are not gonna be white because they're getting the least amount of light as that light curves over to the side. Now I'm going to go back in with the 6B and I'm going to shade in areas that I think would be a little darker. So over here, there might be some reflective light right here. If there's any object over on this side that the light is bouncing off of, it would give her some reflective light on this side of her face. So I'm going to leave like a little sliver of lighter value right here, and then I'm going to give her darker value kind of on her cheekbone. And then there's probably, for some reason, there's a little area under here that gets a little bit of light. So I guess because the face curves around over here, this whole part's going to be in shadow, and then you get some in shadow here that's cast from the nose, but then you have this little area of space underneath the eye that gets some light. So I'm going to leave that alone. And right underneath the eye, you would have some shadow. I'm going to add to that cast shadow from her nose. And then I'm going to blend all that out. I don't want there to be just like a line right here, so I'm shading like with a very light pressure right over that space between where it's dark and where it's light, so that it's not a complete gradient, but it's not like a sharp line either. It's kind of a fuzzy shadow shape on the edge. Okay, at this point, I think I'm going to move into the area of her mouth. So I'm going to go in with the 6B, and I'm going to make this line a little bit darker right here, because that's probably going to be the darkest area of the mouth. And when you're looking at lips, usually, if the light's coming from here, from the side, your lips kind of look like this. So here's your chin. Here's your top lip, here's your bottom lip. So if light is coming this way, your top lip is not getting any of the light. But the bottom lip down here, that is receiving some light. So the bottom lip tends to look lighter than the top lip if light is coming from above, and light is almost always coming from above. So I'm just gonna shade the top lip first and blend that out. And then I'm going to use the blending stump to shade a little bit in the corners and maybe make some little marks in the corner over here and at the bottom just to sort of indicate texture. I'm going to take the 2B and add a few like little vertical lines down here to indicate some more texture in her mouth. And then I'm going to leave that alone for a minute. I'm going to go back to the top lip with the 6B and shade it so it's a little darker at the bottom of the bottom lip. The bottom of the top lip. Okay, and then we're going to look at the chin. So this area of the chin right here is not going to be getting as much light. So there's going to be a bit of a shadow because the way that the mouth is set up, it's pointed away from the light. And then as this part of the chin comes back out, this part will receive some light. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of shadow underneath the mouth And then this part of the face is curved away from the light, so this part's not getting any light. And then as the chin curves back under, it's going to be darker down here too. So it makes kind of a C shape of shadow. Now I'm ready for the area right between the nose and the mouth. You're going to have a little bit of a shadow right underneath the nostrils. And then you're going to have some shadow here on this side of the mouth. And then some people have a little area right above their cupid's bow right here that dips in, and that part would probably be in shadow. And then sometimes this area, once I do that, this is a little light, so I'm just going to barely touch it so it has a little bit of a shadow on it, but it doesn't make everything around it disappear. So I still want this area and this area to be light. And that's also a good place, if it does disappear, where you can kind of go back in with your mechanical eraser on some of those smaller areas if you need to. Okay, so for the nose, I'm going to start by giving it a little bit of a shadow on the left side, and then a little shadow on the bottom. And then if I lose some of the side areas, I can bring that in by shading a little bit of a darker shadow on the side of it over here. Now for this side of the face, if light is coming this way, it's getting the most light right here, and then as this cheek curves in at the nose, there might be a little bit of a shadow right here. And if I spread this out too far, I can go back in with my eraser. And a kneaded eraser would probably work good here for just to kind of tap some of that out. I think it's okay right now. So there's areas that I think I might go in and make like darker or lighter within the face that I want to fix, but before I do that, I'm going to start looking at the neck, because the neck's looking pretty white, and I think we need to bring some value back into that. So I'm going to clean up the hairy lines that I got going on, because I don't need all that. And then I'm going to think about, if the light's coming this way, this area of the neck is going to get the most light, but there may be a little bit less light right underneath where the head is. I don't know that, I think the cast shadow would be on this side, but this may be blocking just a little bit of the light right here. And I think even if it's not, as an artist, I'm going to make the decision to make that value just a little bit darker, just so that there's some contrast between the face and the neck, so that it doesn't blend together. And then I'm going to bring that value down here so that I've got just a little bit of a value down here. And then on this side of the neck, I think it's going to be darker. And it's going to gradually blend in towards the middle. I'm pressing lighter in the middle because I don't want there to be a really strong line. And then I'm giving more pressure over here as I move to the left. I'm also layering it, and I'm making my marks go back and forth in different directions to try to hide some of that mark making. Later, when you're more advanced, You may be able to control your mark making in a way that adds to the drawing so that it looks good to see some of that mark making. You may choose to use cross contour marks or marks that suggest a certain energy. But right now we're just going to blend things out. So before I start working on the hair, I'm just going to look at a few things in the face that I'm being a little picky about. I don't really see much of her pupil here. I'm going to fix some of that. All right, I think I might come back to some of that other stuff later. So, time for hair. I'm going to lightly just kind of shade her ears a little bit. But I'm not doing much with that. It's just enough to kind of suggest that there are ears there and that there is value there, that I'm not getting super detailed with it. And then with the hair, I'm going to shade everything like it's a form, and then I'm going to give it texture. So I'm going to look at these as different shapes. So first I'm going to start with this shape. And if I'm shading this shape and I'm thinking about the light coming from this direction, the most light's going to be here, and then it's going to gradually get darker as it comes around here. So I'm going to shade this area. And the overall value of the hair really depends on the overall value of your person's hair. So if they have blonde hair, it's going to be a lighter value overall. I had brown hair, so it's going to be darker than my skin tone. So it's going to be pretty dark over there. And it's going to be dark probably looking right next to my face too. But over here it's going to be pretty light because I'll probably get some highlights on it right there where the light's hitting it. So I'm going to smooth out that shape. And even though I'm not doing texture yet, I am just shading it as form, I'm still shading in the direction that the hair grows. So I'm making the hair falls this direction, so I'm making strokes in that direction. And then back here, this part of my hair is going to be really dark. You'll probably have to sharpen your pencil a few times. I'm shading in the direction that the hair is growing, even though I'm smoothing it out for now, just in case any of those lines do show up. And right now, all of the value of the hair and the neck are blending together. I can choose later, do I want that? Do I want to pretend like there's some highlights in it to bring those apart? Do I want to pretend like there's a little bit of reflective light right here on her neck? And I can just kind of add a couple of lines just to separate those. That's totally up to you. But I really want to go like pretty dark right here. I'm pressing pretty hard with this pencil right now, getting some really dark values in this area. And shading the hair on this side. This is going to stay pretty light over here. With the hair on this side, some of it next to the neck might have more of a shadow. And then the hair over here on this side, there might be some highlights on. Most of those highlights are going to appear with maybe I'll use the mechanical eraser to show. So if you didn't watch my previous video, I have a few like drawings that I erased, like how I was showing them drawing the eye and what not to do and what to do, and so some of that is still left over there. Okay, so I have the basic forms. Now I want to add the lines for texture. So I'm going to go in with the mechanical eraser first, and I'm going to draw in some lines where I think some highlights would be in the direction that the hair would be growing. So it's going this direction, and I feel like there would be some pretty strong highlights at the top of the head right here. And also over here. You want to try to keep them varied. If all of them are exactly the same length, they stop and start at the exact same place, that's not going to look very realistic. I'm going to blend some of them into the face just because I think it'll break up that line a little bit and look better. There may be a few pieces of like reflected light over here. And now I'm going to use the 6B pencil to go in areas of shadow that I think there might be. And I sharpened it just a second ago too. So then if you want to show like some of the texture of the hair, you can choose certain spots to just have lines show up that you don't blend out. That's going to aid in the texture of the hair. Now if you were trying to do curly hair, you'd be making a different type of line right now. This person's hair is straight, and so I'm making straight lines. So hopefully by completing that drawing, you learned a little bit about how when light hits an object, how you can imagine what that light would be doing and the types of shadows it would be creating. And I also hope that you got an idea for how to shade skin so that it just didn't feel quite so weird at some point. Like eventually it felt like, oh, this is coming together. Like I know when you first started, it probably felt like, oh, she has a black eye, or this looks really bad. Or at some point, I hope you got to a point where you saw it coming together and you started feeling pretty good about it, and you're ready to do a more finished portrait after this.